And good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this very exciting segment on the 27th day of April. Well, it is a wonderful day out there today, 22 degrees and a little bit of rain, a light drizzle in the city. It could be different in other areas as well. But wonderful to have your company today on this segment where we have the news update plus the Daily India report. So let's get on the news today, find out what's happening. Well, of course, right now on the campaign trail, ILP and LNP go head-to-head on the Pacific policy.
When being Prime Minister requires a soft touch.
A bit delicate.
They are very delicate, aren't they?
But if you think making macarons is difficult,
There we go.
healing relations with a Macron will be trickier.
I wish him every congratulations for what is an historic victory for President Macron.
Hello, how are you? Andrew Probyn from the ABC.
The re-elected French president, who had a spectacular falling out with Scott Morrison over a cancelled submarine contract,
Do you think he lied to you?
I don't think, I know.
will be critical in a coordinated response to Beijing's influence in the Indo-Pacific, where France has more than 1 million citizens. China's striking of a military pact with the Solomons of major embarrassment to Scott Morrison's so-called Pacific step-up.
The bloke who just keeps dropping the ball, the bloke who went missing while China negotiated and signed a security deal on our doorstep.
Labor revealing the approach it would take to make Australia the Pacific partner of choice. An extra $500 million in aid over 4 years, 3,000 permanent migration spots for Pacific Islanders, allowing seasonal workers to bring their families, financing climate and clean energy projects, and extending the reach of ABC broadcasts.
I sent in the AFP. The Labor Party wants to send in the ABC. They have a Q&A solution in the Pacific.
Although the PM is refusing to say what he would do if the Chinese established a military base on the Solomons, which he said on the weekend was a red line.
No responsible Prime Minister would go into the sort of detail that you're asking for.
No point in beating your chest if you're beaten to the punch.
Where's that coming from?
On climate, the coalition's accused of sending conflicting messages to rural and city constituents. Queensland Senator Matt Canavan dismissing the government's net zero emissions plan.
The net zero thing is all sort of dead anyway.
Its candidate in the Queensland seat of Flynn describing the government's net zero emissions by 2050 commitment as flexible.
Our candidate in Flynn was talking about is how we get there. He wasn't talking about the commitment himself.
Labor too having to explain how coal production won't be affected by its push to penalise major emitters.
No coal project will face a carbon constraint that is beyond, that will make them internationally uncompetitive.
Scott Morrison's embrace of net zero by 2050 constrains coalition attacks on Labor over climate change. And the Beijing blindside in the Solomons also blunts any government boast on national security. Not that this is stopping them. The PM and his ministers continue to talk tough on China. But if the government's rhetoric was matched by actual defence capability, Australia would have one of the world's strongest militaries. Andrew Probyn, ABC News.
And of course, that is a situation which has got so much attention lately. So let's take a look at what are the politicians saying about Solomon Islands and the China deal.
That smells fantastic.
Oh, mate, I didn't know that.
The Morrison government's dropped the ball at every stage.
A strong coalition government that's running a strong economy.
But they got Mr Morrison, the bloke who just keeps dropping the ball.
They are playing politics with the Pacific.
Mr Morrison doesn't like to listen, and he certainly doesn't like to act.
Another great linkage.
I think a really good thing for the people of the Pacific.
For all the voter exasperation about gotcha moments and the focus on gaffes, election campaigns are all about establishing a dominant message on the day, on putting your opponents on the back foot. Week 3 has seen a decisive shift in the election campaign.
Jobs, jobs and jobs. A strong economy means a stronger future.
We had 2 weeks in which the dominant line was, if you don't understand the economy, how can you possibly know how to run it? That is, the coalition's line. But now it's all about the government dropping the ball, about the Prime Minister going missing, and the perpetual references to holding a hose.
This is a hose you have to hold, put it bluntly. This needs time and attention. You cannot abdicate or step away from responsibility.
The wild card in this campaign has been the Solomon Islands security deal with China. For a government that likes to spruik its defence and national security credentials, that has spent a lot of the campaign at defence facilities, and which has been dialling up its anti-Chinese rhetoric, the Solomons deal has put a big question mark over its credentials.
What happens if the red line you've drawn in Solomon Islands is breached? Are we talking military action? What sort of response would you have?
Well, it would not be responsible for me to be speculating in public about what Australia, the United States and others would be doing in circumstances such as that. That would not be a responsible thing to do.
This from a Prime Minister who on the weekend said that Chinese bases in our region would be a red line for both Australia and the United States. The government's stepped-up rhetoric on the Solomons, including Defence Minister Peter Dutton's Anzac Day warning that we had to prepare for war, set the position to spell out some detailed policies about the Pacific today.
Australians understand this is a time of risk. They understand it's a time of uncertainty, and they want a government that does the work to keep them safe.
Labor unveiled a package of measures that includes a defence school for members of Pacific Island Defence and Security Forces, a doubling of the maritime security program to deal with illegal fishing, more funding for the ABC to broadcast into the region, and a $525 million increase in development assistance. Labor is also promising support for Pacific climate change projects and, significantly, an overhaul of Pacific labour schemes which would ease workforce shortages here. The government was dismissive.
What they're effectively saying is they're going to keep doing what we've been doing. There's one difference though. I sent in the AFP. The Labor Party wants to send in the ABC when it comes to their Pacific solution.
But the government's credentials will be under pressure on other fronts this week. Tomorrow, the Bureau of Statistics will release the quarterly inflation numbers. With prices rising on everything from fuel to food and housing, the Reserve Bank has signalled the need to raise interest rates as inflation lifts beyond its 2 to 3% target range. If the number is big enough, the speculation will be intense between now and next Tuesday's RBA board meeting about the prospect of interest rates rising as early as next week. That's a whole week of election campaign speculation, even if rates ultimately don't rise. And then there is the question of the government's commitment to net zero emissions by 2050.
We have committed to a pathway to 2050, okay? We have committed.
Zero net carbon emissions by 2050. Morrison's document is a flexible plan. It leaves us wiggle room as we proceed into the future.
Yeah, well, the net zero thing is all sort of dead anyway. I mean, Boris Johnson's said he's pausing the net zero commitment. Germany's building coal and gas infrastructure. Italy's reopening coal-fired power plants. It's all over.
The Nationals candidate for the Queensland coal seat of Flynn, Colin Boyce, opened up the question of the Coalition's commitment to net zero emissions by 2050 yesterday with his suggestion that there was, quote, wiggle room in the commitment.
What our candidate in Flynn was talking about is how we get there. He wasn't talking about the commitment himself, and he's clarified that today. Our commitment to net zero by 2050 is a commitment of the Australian government that I made in Glasgow. It is the government's absolute policy.
But the impact of this is that the Coalition appears to be saying one thing in the bush and another in the cities. The political crime the Coalition accused Labor of at the last election. Liberal candidates facing independents in the so-called teal seats in the cities don't seem to have been told there is wiggle room in the policy. Trent Zimmerman, who is under threat in North Sydney, said it was a, quote, binding commitment which the government should and will honour. Dave Sharma told his local paper in the electorate of Wentworth that he had personally, quote, delivered a binding agreement to net zero emissions by 2050 and an upgraded 2030 emissions reduction target. Barnaby Joyce is a problem for the Coalition in these seats, with independents arguing that a vote for the Liberal candidate is a vote for Joyce.
Labor would govern with the Greens, and it will be Greens that will be pulling Labor's strings. They'll certainly never be pulling my strings, ever.
The garlic, where's that coming
But the PM's headache now is the opposite. Labor and others are casting the Liberal Party as a hostage to a minor party which has clearly been pulling the climate policy strings.
They look fantastic.
Both the News poll and Ipsos polls published in the last 24 hours show no significant change in the major party standing since the beginning of the...
So no major change in the significant standing of the two parties. And by the looks of it, they've been all talking, but, there have not been any credible or any statement of substance which goes, wow, this is great. Looking at both the sides, they are there making lots of mistakes, a lot of slip-ups in what they're saying, and then a lot of, saying sorry, or this is not what I meant, this is what my minister really meant, and this is what the message was supposed to be. So it's rather sloppy is what I would say. And what about this report where it says that this is the economy the stupid voters wanted? Wow, how about that?
Melbourne's election battlegrounds. The competition and campaign tactics are getting fierce. Chisholm, Higgins, Goldstein and Kooyong. These are key seats that could change the outcome of who wins at the polls on May 21.
I'm here in Melbourne's eastern suburb of Box Hill. It's in the electorate of Chisholm, which is one of the most marginal seats in the country, held by just 0.5%.
Liberal Gladys Liu is up against union official Labor's Karina Garland. Anti-government sentiment over Australia-China trade relations is threatening Miss Liu's campaign.
There is that element of what we use the term China bashing and racism, and that has impacted on the Chinese/Asian Australian community, and the impact of that government rhetoric will impact on the vote of a younger generation of Chinese Australians.
The seat of Chisholm is one of the country's most diverse. More than 50% of people here were born overseas, with about 15% coming from China. But it's not just Australia-China tensions that matter to voters here. Key economic issues will also influence how they vote.
Waitress Joyce Kwan says housing affordability is also a big issue.
I know that in the future it's probably a little bit harder for me to even think about purchasing somewhere around the area or even close to Melbourne.
The 18-year-old also wants action to reduce carbon emissions.
More climate change policies in regards to cutting down fossil fuels, because there's only so much you can do as an individual to stop it.
The seat of Higgins, which takes in Melbourne's inner southeastern suburbs, is currently held by Liberal Katie Allen with a margin of 2.6%. Over the years, Liberal support here has been diminishing. If the party's first preference vote declines further, the electorate could be lost to Labor or the Greens. Business groups want investment in skills. They say with interest rates set to rise and cost of living issues compounding, people need secure and well-paid jobs.
Ensuring that they have access to sustainable long-term employment prospects, that's fundamental.
I'm here in Brighton. It's one of a number of Bayside suburbs that the electorate of Goldstein covers, and it's one of several seats held by the coalition that's being challenged by climate-focused independents. But it's not just climate change that matters to voters here.
Goldstein also covers the inland suburbs of Elstonwick and Gardenvale. Traditionally a safe Liberal seat, it's held by Tim Wilson with a margin of 7.8%. But now independent candidate Zoe Daniel poses a threat. The former ABC journalist is campaigning on big issues like climate change and political integrity. Cafe owner Andrew Gelman wants policies that make running a business easier, which includes helping his become more sustainable.
Climate change is a huge issue across the board. People want to see action. The biggest difference is going to be made if the government enforces it.
Mr Gelman also worries it's getting harder to get full-time staff in hospitality. He wants politicians to crack down on businesses that underpay workers and longer-term visas for migrants.
Maybe if migrant workers didn't have just a set amount of time, they would be looking at longer term work.
Another blue ribbon electorate, about 12 kilometres away, is Kooyong. This inner Melbourne area covers suburbs east of the CBD. Josh Frydenberg has held the seat since 2010, but there's a risk the Federal Treasurer could now lose it to independent Monique Ryan, who's campaigning on climate action and improved healthcare. While many voters here want action to save the environment, Hawthorn beauty therapist Maria Vlahos is more concerned about the post-pandemic recovery.
I think the big problem is the economy. Everybody's scared.
She says foot traffic is still down and wants businesses to get cash grants of up to $5,000 to help them get back on track.
Everybody's talking about normality and that it's not happening fast enough. So businesses are struggling.
The seat of Kooyong, which has existed since Federation, has always been held by the Conservative side of politics. But this year the challenge is which candidate can convince voters that a future under them is one where jobs and businesses boom.
And those are some of the big ticket items, and of course we know that today the younger generation or the younger voters are very, very concerned about the climate change. Well, it has been drilled and they've come up with that, and even the youngsters in the schools these days are very, very concerned, they've all are probably more leaning towards the Greens, if you ask my opinion, because of the way things are, what they have all been exposed to, the topics that have been discussed, and it's always in the news and been discussed. That what's happening to the world, it is not what it used to be. We humans are to be blamed, and we need to do this. So it is now, in a way, brainwashed. But that is a reality that climate change is a big ticket item in this election. Well, the other, because I'm also looking at the time as well, the other point that is on the verge of things is the wage rise. There's been so much talk about all the cost going up, and what about the wages, whether they've been, of course, then it's the case the wages goes up, inflation goes up, interest rates goes up, and where does that leave everyone else, meaning these small to medium businesses, and they doing it tough as they are. I mean, if it wasn't for the, in many instances, the Key Rider, which is a loan from the government, and special grants that came out, and the JobKeeper, and if it wasn't for all this, many businesses would have closed the doors and gone. Because in the current environment and at the rate of pay, they just cannot afford to keep people employed. It's a simple fact of life. That's what it is. Do the economics and you'll find out there is just not enough business, or there's not enough profit in the business to sustain that kind of labor force at that rate. So, it is very, very simple. And unions, of course, are always pushing for higher wages.
The Health Services Union is making its pitch.
It is now time to make sure we can attract and we can retain good people in aged care to support our most vulnerable.
The Fair Work Commission is considering its application to boost wages by 25%. If successful, that would bring the hourly rate for entry-level workers up from about $22 to about $29. It's a change that would affect more than 200,000 people.
It's actually a highly skilled job, but it's paid as if it was a menial job.
An increase in award wages was a key recommendation of the Aged Care Royal Commission as a way to attract and retain properly skilled staff.
Since November 2020, over 100 statements have been filed in this matter, and we've had a significant number of submissions from employers in support of the HSU's application, and that's really important.
Today, opposition leader Anthony Albanese said a Labor government would recruit doctors and nurses from overseas as a stopgap measure to fulfil its promise to provide around-the-clock care in residential settings. That's despite an earlier promise to focus on recruiting Australians.
Skilled migration has a role to play in filling legitimate skills shortages. It always has and it always will.
In February, the federal government announced 2 one-off payments of up to $400 to workers to prevent a mass exodus from the industry. It says it will honour the Fair Work decision, but hasn't promised to fund it. The Commission will hear from witnesses over 5 weeks into July, and a decision isn't expected until the end of this year or early next year. Proceedings will continue at the Commission tomorrow. Ruby Cornish, ABC News.
So there you are, as I mentioned, that the push for wages, and of course we know that it is not easy work in aged care as well, and the skilled workers getting doctors and nurses from overseas is the way to fill in those shortages. And special category visas are also been on the table. One of the discussions we had with Minister Hawke when he was here a few days back was on those sort of lines as well. One of the concerns that was raised was about a little bit of training into the Australian way and the things, because having an overseas academic qualification could be enough, but to get a job, but you'll also need to be trained locally, have local knowledge. And I back that. I back that decision, because it is very, very important to know the cultural norms and nuances of the country we live in. Well, right now it's time to go to our daily India report.
Welcome to Daily India Report that brings you glimpses of the changing India. In our first story, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi held talks with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. The EU seeks to strengthen energy ties with India. Modi and Ursula Leyen met in New Delhi on April 25th and reviewed progress in the India-EU strategic partnership. Both leaders agreed to deepen cooperation in areas of trade, climate, digital technology and people-to-people ties. The EU seeks to strengthen energy ties with India as Brussels aims to diversify away from sourcing oil and gas from Russia in the wake of its invasion of Ukraine. In the backdrop of the war, the EU has expressed a keen interest in partnering with India in its quest for renewable energy and reducing dependence on non-renewable sources like fossil fuel. It also intends to invest in clean energy on a large scale while stressing the importance of EU-India cooperation. Soon after her meeting with Prime Minister Modi, Leyen tweeted, quote, EU-India cooperation on solar and green hydrogen is key, end quote. The European Commission is the executive branch of the EU. This is von der Leyen's maiden visit to India in her present capacity. Modi told the president during his meeting that, quote, the partnership with India is one of our most important relationships for the coming decades. India and EU ties are poised for enhanced growth and our partnership is expected to increase in the coming times, end quote. Officials said von der Leyen responded saying India-EU ties were more important than ever before and as democracies support the rules-based international order, adding that large economies were facing a challenging global landscape. Earlier, Indian External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar called on Leyen. India and the EU will launch the EU-India Trade and Technology Council. The Trade and Technology Council will provide the political steer and the necessary structure to operationalize political decisions, coordinate technical work and report to the political level to ensure implementation and follow-up in areas that are important for the sustainable progress of European and Indian economies. India strengthens its defense preparedness and has now become the third highest defense spender after the US and neighbor China. India is now the third highest military spender in the world, according to a report by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute released on April 25th. India's military spending of $76.6 billion is behind only the United States with $801 billion and China with $293 billion, followed by the United Kingdom and Russia. These five countries together account for 62% of the global military expenditure. According to SIPRI, total global military expenditure increased by 0.7% in 2021 to reach $2,113 billion. This was the first time that world military expenditure crossed the $2 trillion mark and in the seventh consecutive year that spending increased. India's military spending was up 0.9% compared to 2020 and 33% from 2012. The report also said that to strengthen the indigenous army industry, 64% of India's capital outlays in the military budget of 2021 were earmarked for acquisitions of domestically produced arms. India's grand old political party, the Indian National Congress, has announced its action plan for the 2024 national elections with an empowered action group. Congress is working fervently to rise above the huge losses it has suffered in the recent state elections in India. In a bid to demonstrate that its leaders are shaping up the party, the Congress on April 25th announced an action plan in the wake of the 2024 national elections. No announcement was made if political strategist Prashant Kishore would join the party or become its strategist. Congress will be making the announcement in Udaipur, Rajasthan next month during a 3-day conclave. The announcement will feature an empowered action group that address political challenges ahead of the 2024 national elections. Congress spokesperson Randeep Surjewala announced that Congress chief Sonia Gandhi formed the 2024 task force following a report filed by an 8-member group last week and a discussion held on 25th April. The crucial meeting by Congress top brass also discussed poll strategist Prashant Kishore's proposal to revamp the party. The Congress panel set up by Sonia Gandhi to work out a revival plan as suggested by poll strategist Prashant Kishore had submitted a report on its findings on April 22nd. Surjewala said the Congress president has decided to convene a Chintan Shivir of the Indian National Congress Nav Sankalp in Udaipur in the party's ruled state of Rajasthan on May 13th, 14th and 15th, 2022. About 400 congressmen and women coming from every state will participate. 2 members of the panel, K.C. Venugopal and Priyanka Gandhi Vadra, met Sonia Gandhi at her residence to submit the report to her. Rajasthan Chief Minister Ashok Gehlot has openly praised Prashant Kishore, calling him a brand. Senior Congress leader Virappa Moily has said that those opposing Kishore's entry to the party are anti-reformers. Some leaders have also said that Kishore's relations with a few regional parties could benefit Congress if he formally joins the party. Gautam Adani-owned Adani Wilmar has become the 7th group stock to hit $1 trillion or rupees 1 lakh crore market capitalization for the first time. India's Adani Wilmar has become the 7th group stock to hit 1 trillion or 1 lakh crore rupee market capitalization for the first time, as the stock hit an all-time high of rupees 798 on April 26th and rose as much as 5% from the previous close. Share prices have surged 247% since listing on 8th February after being priced at rupees 230 a piece in IPO and have gained 54% this month. This comes on the heels of Adani Power popping into the rupees 1 trillion club. Other group firms to walk into the rupees 1 trillion club are Adani Green Energy, Adani Transmission, Adani Total Gas, Adani Enterprises and Adani Ports and Special Economic Zone. Adani Wilmar's fortune improved since listing on higher volumes in edible oil, with the sunflower oil supply being disrupted due to the Russia-Ukraine war. Consumers are shifting to alternatives such as soya bean, groundnut and mustard oil. Mukesh Ambani's Reliance Industries has called off the much talked about deal with the Future Group after its secured creditors voted against the deal. This has plummeted the share prices of Future Group by almost 20%. Almost 2 years after signing an agreement for a rupees 24,713 crore deal with Kishore Bayani-led Future Group to acquire its retail, wholesale, logistics and warehousing assets, Reliance Industries Limited has said that the transaction cannot go ahead as the Future Group's secured creditors have voted against it. In a regulatory filing, Reliance said Future Group companies comprising Future Retail Limited and other listed companies involved in the scheme have intimated the results of the voting on the scheme of arrangement by their shareholders and creditors at their respective meetings. The Future Group companies had called meetings of their shareholders, secured and unsecured creditors this week to get the approval of the scheme of amalgamation and sale of assets as per the deal announced with Reliance Retail. Shares of Future Group firms on April 25th faced heavy drubbing, tanking up to 20% after Reliance Industries' no-deal announcement. The stock of Future Consumer plummeted 19.91%. Future Supply Chain Solutions slipped 19.96%, Future Lifestyle Fashions 19.89%, Future Enterprises tumbled 9.87%, and Future Retail fell 4.96% on the Bombay Stock Exchange. Indian-Russian officials held a meeting to resolve problems related to the shipping of coking coal from Russia. The meeting was meant to clear doubts about the payment methods. Indian and Russian officials held a meeting last week in an effort to resolve an impasse over the shipping of coking coal to Indian steelmakers, which has dried up since March over payment methods. Russia usually supplies about 30% of European Union, Japanese and South Korean coking coal needs, while India had planned to double its Russian imports to around 9 million tons in 2022. Imports make up around 85% of India's overall coking coal needs, which total 50 to 55 million tons a year. And New Delhi last year signed a deal to import from Russia. But complications with the processing of payments and logistics as a result of sanctions against Russia mean steel mills are opting for alternative sources such as Australia and the United States, pushing up prices in the process. Australia, India's top supplier of coking coal, has raised its price from $200 to $700 per ton this year, while flows from Russia have dried up completely since March, raising worries among India's steelmakers over their supplies. Title song from the film Sarkaru Varipata has been released. The song features megastar Mahesh Babu and provides an insight into his character in the film. The title song of Telugu director.
And ladies and gentlemen, that's about all we have time for in this segment today. Don't forget that at 10 a.m. we also have the real estate update with Usha Chandra. We will see you then. And it's been wonderful having your company on this 27th day of April. Well, it's still a little bit cloudy out there with a fine, very little drizzle out there, and 22 degrees in Brisbane currently. It's been wonderful having your company.